Welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa Allistway, and on this channel, you will find a variety of inspirational and informational videos. So if that sounds good to you and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. My guest today is Robert Key. Robert is an Ironman athlete, motivational speaker, and author, and also has a background in commercial real estate and marketing. Robert overcame 2 separate heart procedures in 2010 and nearly died. He went on to successfully complete many Ironman and ultramarathons and other running events. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. I love your background.
Well, it goes a long way back. I actually started running when I was 11 years old.
Oh, okay.
So I've been active and I've been a runner pretty much my entire life.
Okay, fantastic. That was going to be one of my opening questions. Was I know you had these heart events in 2010.
Right.
How old were you in 2010, if you don't mind me asking?
I had just turned 50.
50. Okay. So prior to 2010, prior to your 50th birthday, I was going to ask you about your health, your fitness. You know, was there any warning signs or risk factors that were coming up before then?
So the answer to that is no, none whatsoever. And my cardiologist, which when I tell the story in a little bit more detail, my cardiologist explained to me that what happened to me was one of those things that I was predisposed to. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter that I was doing too much exercise. Many people said, oh gosh, it's probably because you were doing too much exercise. And actually, in reality, the cardiologist explained to me, I would have never made it to his office if I had not been in the physical condition I was in. So nothing predisposed. I've always been relatively, a healthy person. Just and thank goodness I had kept myself fit.
So there was a genetic component. Did you know about that? Like from a father, grandfather? You didn't know any, you didn't know your family?
No, what I had was, so basically I had a condition called atrial flutter. Okay. Now, most people are familiar with AFib. Mm-hmm. And AFib is sort of like the way I describe it, and I'm not a doctor, but the way I describe AFib is it's almost like the check engine light comes on in your car. And unless you're at the doctor while it's happening, sometimes it's hard for them to catch. So atrial flutter is different in that my heartbeat basically went completely out of control. All of us have a God-given pacemaker that electrically fires the impulses of our heart. And mine just went haywire. So let me just back up a little bit. So in 2008, I had just gotten into the sport of triathlon. I had already done a lot of marathons. I had run Boston Marathon 3 times. And so I decided the next step for me in endurance, which I've always enjoyed endurance sports, was to get into Ironman. So I did a half Ironman in Austin, Texas. That was my very first triathlon. That was a 1.2 mile swim, 56 mile bike, and 13.1 mile run. So I had really gotten into the sport and ended up doing 4 of those over the next 2 years. And then when I turned 50, I decided I wanted to do an Ironman. So an Ironman is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, 26.2 mile run, and you have 17 hours to finish. So I had signed up to do Ironman Louisville in August of 2010, and my training was going absolutely great. I just completed, I think, my 20th marathon in Little Rock, Arkansas, and was about 6 to 8 months out from the race, and just I was in great physical condition. So I look back in my running log, and just purely coincidental, today, 12 years ago, I entered in my running log that I went out for what I called my 10 plus Tuesday. I would do an interval run on Tuesdays of 10 miles or more, where I would do periods of fast running and then cool down and that sort of thing. And I had noted in my running log on that specific day that I just didn't feel right. Now, when you're an athlete, you you have good days and you have bad days. So I just attributed it to all the training I'd been doing, and it was just one of those days that just was not a good day. But I just didn't feel right on that day.
So let me stop you there. What do you mean you didn't feel right? You felt nauseous? You felt?
No, I just got fatigued very quickly.
Okay.
And again, there are days like that. I mean, there's days where even with all I've done, I can go out and, you know, I run a mile and I feel like I'm going to just collapse, you know, just because you have days like that.
Okay.
So that's pretty much what I attributed it to. So a few more days went by and I still wasn't feeling myself, but I just thought perhaps I was overtraining, which is easy to do when you do some of these sports. So on Monday night, May 31st, 2010, I was laying on my back in bed, and I never lay on my back when I start out to go to sleep. And I had taken my right hand and just laid it on my chest. And I thought, wow, that heartbeat is crazy. So, you know, and again, I just attributed it to all the training, but I couldn't tell how fast it was beating.
And you were in a laying down position.
In a laying down position, yeah. I was resting.
Mm-hmm.
So the next day, I get up and I go down to my local Walgreens and go to their blood pressure machine just to check it out and see what was going on. And I'll never forget, I stuck my arm in and it came up and it said that my pulse was 145 beats a minute.
Whoa.
Now my normal resting pulse is usually between 40 and 45. Even the age I am today, it's that. It's that.
Athletes have very low resting pulse for the audience. Yeah.
Very, very. So I looked around. I thought somebody was punking me, and so I ended up putting it, you know, redoing it like 3 different times.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, something is going on here, and I couldn't figure out what it was. So I called and made an appointment with a cardiologist, and I made the appointment for the cardiologist on Friday, June 4th. Now, what's significant about that is my son, who's also named Robert, was graduating from high school that day. So I go to the cardiologist office and I have this long dissertation of all the exercise I do and all the reasons that whatever this is has got to be some kind of a fluke. And he looked at my EKG and he told me immediately to sit down. He said, if you were not in the physical condition you were in, you wouldn't even be here right now. You wouldn't have even made it to my office. So he said, I need to admit you to the hospital immediately, to the emergency room. And I said, okay, but it's 11 o'clock right now. My son's graduating this evening. How long is this going to take?
Oh my gosh. Let me ask you one quick thing. What was your blood pressure reading?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember.
You were very high though.
I was focused on the average heart rate.
Okay.
So he laughed when I said that. He said, you won't be attending your son's graduation. You'll be hospitalized. So they admitted me to the ER and immediately started running tests on me. And that's when they confirmed the atrial flutter. Now, and again, I'm not a doctor, so when I explain this, I'm explaining it from how it was explained to me by the doctors. Mm-hmm. What was rare about my specific instance of atrial flutter was it never stopped. It stuck at 145, 24/7. My heart rate never came down. Mm-hmm. Not even, I mean, it was right there the entire time. So they started administering drugs to me while I was in the hospital to get my heart rate to come down. And he would come in and they'd give me a shot and he'd sit there and he would look at his watch and he would say, nothing is happening. And I'll never forget him telling me, you're not a textbook case. So what was rare about it again was that they couldn't get it to come down. So I'm in the hospital over the weekend, and on Monday morning, they scheduled me for what's called a TEE, a transesophageal echocardiogram. Of everything that happened to me with my heart, that was the scariest thing of all, and here's why. When your heart is beating that fast, the blood just spins in your ventricle. And when it spins in your ventricle and it can't be released into your bloodstream, it can form clots. So the danger I was under was if I had begun to form clots, that brought up a whole other set of bad issues, because if they went in and they corrected my heart rate, all the clots would be released into my bloodstream and I'd have a stroke. So the scariest part of all was the TEE. So basically what they do is they snake it's like a tube camera down the back of your throat, and they're looking at your heart from the inside. And thankfully, I didn't have any clots. So they scheduled my first procedure for June 7th. And what I went in for is what's called a radio frequency ablation. There's many people that are familiar with an ablation, but if you're not, I'll explain to you what it is. In an ablation, they basically they will make an incision in your femoral artery, and they'll snake a catheter up through your femoral artery to your heart, and then they use mapping software to map out where your heart is misfiring, and they can get it down to 1/100th of a centimeter, if I'm correct, and they will actually burn that spot and cauterize it, and it negates that electrical impulse that's not firing correctly. So that's the whole purpose of the ablation. Well, they weren't sure. Again, like I said, I was not a textbook case. They weren't sure what my heart was doing. They ended up making incisions in both of my femoral arteries and an incision in my neck. They had 8 separate catheters going into my body, trying to get this thing pinpointed and get it done. Now, a funny side note, when they were getting me ready, they asked me, they said, "What's your pain threshold like?" And they said, because the more conscious you are during the procedure, the better it is for us, because we can ask you questions. And of course, I'm thinking, oh, I'm training for an Ironman. I've done all this. I got a high pain threshold. So that basically means they sedate you enough to where you don't feel all of that, but you're still awake and can feel pain. So when they did the first burn on my heart, the only way I can describe it is it felt like somebody had taken a poker out of the fireplace and just stuck it in my chest.
Ooh.
And I think I shouted out something like, "Well, isn't that special?" Just trying to make light of it. The other thing is, thankfully, I'm not claustrophobic. I remember, if you've ever seen the movie Frankenstein, when they got him on the operating table. Okay. I remember them placing the leather straps all over my arms and my legs, because you cannot move at all because the pinpoint accuracy of this procedure. So the other funny story was, I remember I looked up and they had tiles in the ceiling, and I guess this was to make people feel better, but it was clouds in the sky. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be looking up at the light right now. Let's get through this thing. So going back one step, before they were able to operate on me, they had to make sure that my heart rate was down enough to where they could operate. So before they took me into the OR, the doctor came in and he said, "Okay, we're going to give you this drug and it's going to bring your heart rate down." And I said, "Okay, great." So he shoots me with the drug. Nothing happened. He looks at me and he says, "Well, rarely I've had to give this shot to people twice." And so he said, "We're going to give it to you again." So he gave it to me again. Nothing happened. He said, and this guy had been a cardiologist for, I think, 30 years. And he said, "I've never had to give anybody this shot 3 times. So he gives me the shot the 3rd time. Nothing happened. He gets on the phone and calls the nurses down and says, "Bring a defibrillator."
Oh my gosh.
When they administered the 4th shot, they basically overdosed me on this drug. And when they administered the 4th shot, I had a person standing over me with the paddles in case I went into heart failure. So thankfully, the fourth shot got my heart rate to come down. I think it was to around 80 or 90.
I would have my heart rate go even more on that fourth shot.
Yeah, it was, I guess in some ways, the whole process was also interesting. I was never scared during the whole thing. I was nervous about the TEE and whether or not they would find clots, but during the rest of it, I had a peace about me that I can't really describe.
Did you use that kind of strategically? Like, let me see if I can calm myself down. Let me see if I can just even bring my heart rate down by my breathing and relaxation. Were you kind of like in that meditative state to try to help the situation?
Right, because you're dealing with something that's completely out of your control.
Yes.
And this is one thing I've learned in life, and I've learned it in the endurance sports I do. The only thing you're in control of is your attitude. That's it.
That's Viktor Frankl 101 right there.
Yeah. If you don't maintain a good attitude about things, about anything for that matter, you can get yourself all worked up and so forth. So I chose to just look at it as, wow, this is really cool. I've got a ringside seat to whatever is going on here. So they do the procedure, and the procedure was supposed to take 1 hour. My procedure took 3 hours, and they ended up doing 3 burns on my heart. And again, as I said, I'm consciously sedated, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm perceptive about people. And I remember laying there on the table thinking, this just doesn't seem like it's going the way they thought it was going to go. So at the end of the 3rd burn, the doctor leaned over me and he said, Mr. Key, we think we got it, but just to make sure, we're going to stop your heart and restart it.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I actually, the first words out of my mouth were, cool. Am I going to be awake for that too? And he said, he kind of laughed. He said, no, you won't be awake for that. So they stopped my heart, restarted it. Thankfully, I didn't hear, like a car starting. But anyway, so they restarted my heart. And
with the paddles, how did they restart your heart?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what they did.
Okay.
My guess is that's what they did. But I think what they do is they administer a drug to you that stops it, and then they bring it back.
And why did they need to do that?
Well, this is what I later learned. Back in the old days, before the ablation procedure came around, the only way they knew how to fix that was to stop and restart your heart. In other words, trying to stop it and then correct the rhythm of it by rebooting it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Like we're like a computer.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was the reasoning behind that as I understood it. So I leave the hospital and my resting heart rate, I think, was back down to like 70 or 80, but it still wasn't down to where it normally was. And the doctor said, 80% of the cases, you're going to be fine. Don't do any exercise or anything for 2 or 3 weeks and you'll be okay. So I went back in.
Did you have to do cardiac rehab or anything like that?
No. And actually, I was in such good physical condition that I didn't even need to stay on any of the blood thinners they were giving me.
Okay.
Again, I was not a textbook case.
Right.
So I came home and waited, again, I think it was a couple of weeks, and went back in for a checkup, and they checked my heart rate and so forth and said, okay, you're good to start exercising again. Now, when I say that, I don't mean Ironman exercising. I mean, when they first cleared me, I was allowed to, I think, walk for 1 minute at a time. That was it.
Wow.
And it was a slow walk. So did that. So a couple of weeks go by. And, they said, as long as you feel good, you can keep upping your exercise regimen. So on June 27th, 2010, which was 20 days after my procedure, I went on a bike ride. Now, I don't mean a training ride. I mean just a little leisurely bike ride. And back up again. I use a Garmin. I know different people use different watches, but Garmin has a heart rate strap that you can pair with your watch. And if anybody out there is watching this, if I can tell you one thing, the strap is far more accurate than the watch, than where the watch picks up your heart rate on your wrist. So I was wearing a strap all the time. And so I go out for this bike ride, and I remember going up this small incline. You know, we don't have hills down here in Houston. So I went up this small incline. I remember looking down at my watch, and my heart rate was like 125. And that was, you know, for the amount of effort I was doing, that was no big deal. So I go back down to flat ground, and I'm pedaling very easily, and I look down, and it's still at 125. I get back home, look at my watch. Now it's like at 140, and I'm not doing anything. So I had a recurrence. Now, people are going to watch that and watch what I just said, and they'll think, well, you know, dummy, you shouldn't have gone out and done that. But what I found out from my second cardiologist, who I'll tell you about in a second, was that the first procedure had failed, period. It's just that particular bit of exercise that I did made it show up sooner that it had failed, if that makes sense. So had a reoccurrence.
And they had warned you, right, that you could possibly have a reoccurrence, right?
Right. That 80. Oh yes. And again, I've since found out that 80% of ablations being successful is probably a high number. I really don't know that it's that high. So anyway, but it wasn't uncommon that they didn't take. So the first time around, when I chose my cardiologist, I just basically looked up somebody in the phone book who was on my PPO, and that's who I went to. 'Cause I didn't know anything about it. Well, the second time around, I have a very good friend who's been in cardiology for 35 years as a nurse. And I contacted her and I said, hey, it looks like this has happened again. Who would you recommend? And she said, I would recommend Dr. Ali Masumi, who works at St. Luke's. So I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Masumi and went in, and he had a demeanor about him that was so sure and positive and comforting and no BS. And I remember having a long discussion with him about what had happened to me. And he said, I can fix you.
That's good news.
Yeah, it was. Well, yeah. So they scheduled okay. So when you have an ablation, it creates scar tissue on your heart. And you can't go in and just have one again immediately. You have to wait a certain, I believe it was like 4 or 5 weeks for that scar tissue to heal. And it takes it a little longer to heal since it's inside your body, if that makes sense. So they scheduled my second one for July 13th. And I went in that morning, and I said a minute ago, I didn't think I was scared. I was scared the second time because I've been so active my entire life. You know, I'm thinking about my family, my kids, everything. I've been so active my entire life. I think I was probably more concerned, am I ever going to be able to run again? Am I going to be able to be active at all? How much is this going to limit my life? And that was big to deal with that mentally. So I went in on July 13th and got there early in the morning. They got me prepped and ready. And I remember going into the operating room, and just everything about it, Dr. Masumi, his staff, everything, none of them were saying, we don't think we can fix this. So my second procedure, again, took about 3 hours. And when it was done, we asked, in post-op, we asked, when should I come back in for a checkup? He goes, oh, 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
He said, we got it. We nailed it. And then he told me, and I want to share this because this is important for any of your listeners that may be very physically active. He told me he was convinced that the reason the first one did not take was because I was so fit that my heart muscle was thicker than a normal person's. We forget sometimes our heart is a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he didn't think that the first doctor had done the burn deeply enough with my heart muscle being thicker.
When you say thicker, do you mean it was enlarged?
No.
Not
It's just
enlarged.
that when you're as I don't mean this the way it's going to come out. When you're as fit as I was, your heart muscle is just naturally thicker.
Okay.
Like any other muscle you have, if you work it out, it's going to get stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it was not. I did not have an enlarged heart at all. But that's a very good question. So he did the burn more deeply. When I left the hospital and I was out of the hospital that evening. When I left that evening, my resting heart rate was back down to, I think, 43,
Okay.
which is the lowest it had been. It was back down to where it had been before. So again, that was July 13th. And I have to say that even to this day, 12 years later, since this happened, even to this day, when I'm out doing any kind of exercise, I still am looking at my watch, waiting for that heart rate to come down.
Mm.
It's something that you can't live in fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's something it makes such an impact on you that you can't forget about it. So I remember him telling me, rest for a couple of weeks and then you can start your exercise regimen. So I did. And the second time around, I could tell I was coming back much more quickly. I was getting back to my old self, so to speak. Well, in the midst of all this going on, I had forgotten that I had entered a half Ironman in Austin that was taking place in October. I can't remember the date.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 87 days after my second procedure.
Mm-hmm.
So I start training again. And again, extremely slowly. I did the 1 minute walk thing. When I went to the pool, I used to swim 4,000 to 5,000 meters without stopping. Well, I was swimming one length of the pool and stopping and checking my heart rate.
Your doctor said it was okay to do that Austin event?
Well, he told me, he said, monitor yourself and just make sure your heart rate stays where it's supposed to be. And, if it doesn't, obviously call me and let me know. But he said, you'll be able to judge where you are. And
okay.
So again, I didn't start even walking for at least 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly got back into it. And as the time went on, I was progressing. And because I was already physically fit, so to speak, my fitness level came back really quickly. So suddenly I'm looking at it and I'm saying, wow, I might be able to actually do this race. And I was smart about it. I wasn't, you can't let your ego get involved.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take a step back and say, I've got to do what's best for my health. But again, I was strong and I had no ill side effects or anything from this. So kept going. Long story short, I find myself, I believe it was actually October 8th, find myself standing on the shore of Lake Decker in Austin, getting ready to jump in the water to do a half Ironman, and got out of the swim and I looked at my watch and I had actually swam a personal best for the 1.2 miles and got off my bike, and I had a fantastic bike, crossed the finish line. I had a personal best in a half Ironman.
Mm.
87 days after the second procedure. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was. And I cried 2 times during this entire process. I cried when I found out I wasn't going to be able to do it at my son's graduation.
Mm.
And I cried when I crossed the finish line of that race, because that told me that I was back.
Oh, yeah.
So around that time, Ironman announces that they're going to have Ironman Texas for the very first time. So the full Ironman, the 2.4 mile swim, 112 bike, 26.2 run. And it was on May 21st, 2011. So I decided to set that as a goal. And again, being smart the whole time, not, monitoring what my heart rate was, monitoring how I felt overall, and set that as a goal. Well, the one thing I did, this towel that's on my shoulder right here, when I did the Austin half Ironman, in a triathlon, you have transitions. You have a transition from the swim to the bike, and you have a transition from the bike to the run. So obviously, when you get out of the water, you're wet, and you got to dry yourself off so you can get ready for the bike. So this towel, which I confiscated from the hospital after my second procedure, it was draped over my lower torso. This towel was in my transition bag, and I used it to dry off. And it also reminded me how blessed and fortunate I was to even be there. And this towel was in my transition bag for every single triathlon I did after that, always for the exact same reason. So Ironman Texas was coming up the following year in May of 2011. Trained for it. And on May 21st, 2011, I completed my first Ironman. It was 312 days after the second heart procedure. And what I didn't realize at the time is I'm a public speaker. And what I didn't realize at the time is how many people were watching me who had lost hope because of a heart condition they had. And they were seeing what I was able to do and what I was able to accomplish. Now, there are people that have much worse heart issues than what I had. I don't want to say that. Trust me, there are people that have much worse heart issues than I do. So, and I understood that, but I also understood that I felt like I had a responsibility to be a positive influence on these people. So after I had done Ironman Texas, I decided, I wanted to do another one because, we're stupid that way.
You forget the pain and you're like, I want to do it again.
Yeah. You're getting close to the finish line, and you say, I'm never going to do this again. And you cross the finish line, and you say, when's the next race? So I signed up to do Ironman Florida, which was 6 months later. And while I was at Ironman Florida, there are a group of us. One of them is a gentleman who works in media for Ironman, and we were all just talking in the lobby, sharing stories, and I was just talking about what had happened to me. And he said, will you please write that up and send it to me? And I said, sure. I didn't think anything about it. So sent it to him. I ended up doing Ironman Florida. And that was in November of 2011. So in December of 2011, a friend of mine called me one day and he said, have you been to the Ironman website? And I said, no. And he said, well, you need to go. You're on there. I was like, I couldn't figure out why. So I went there. They had recognized my story as one of the top 15 performances in the world for Ironman for that year.
Wow.
For what I had overcome.
Yeah.
Which was very humbling. But again, I looked at it as giving hope to people who were struggling with heart issues.
And also just like facing your fears. Because I can imagine that it triggers people to think and maybe stops them from living and doing and exercising. So you're setting that example.
Yeah, so Alberto Salazar was the last American before Meb to win the Boston Marathon. He won it in 1983. And he has, to me, what is one of my all-time favorite quotes. He said, we are all cowards standing on the starting line. And what I tell people is, I don't think it matters how long you've been doing something or how often you've done it, or if it's your first, especially if it's your first time. But I always tell people, if you're standing there and you think you're the only one who's nervous and scared and so forth, you're not. Everybody around you is. People just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. And so, also, not to downplay the seriousness of this, because there are people who die running races. And
there are,
I've
yes.
read the articles, I've seen that in young people, younger than you. And I mean, so the fear is real. And
Yeah.
that is a unfortunate life scenario. But you, I mean, obviously powered through all of that. And I'm sure your mind played a lot of mental games with all of that.
Well, so Ironman did a short couple of minute video about what happened to me, and they played it at the Ironman Texas dinner in 2012, and they asked me to come up and talk.
Mm-hmm.
So a woman from Australia, I won't mention her name out of respect to her, but she contacted me on Facebook, and she said, my husband had done 15 Ironman races, and in 2007, I kissed him before he went in the water at Ironman Australia, and he was dead before he came back to shore.
Oh my God.
And he had the exact same heart condition I had.
Ooh.
And so she and I've never been able to meet her in person. I hope to someday, but she and I she's always kept up with my races, always told me how much it meant to her and would have meant to her husband to see me continuing on. But again, you make an impact, and you just really don't even know it. So I continued on with Ironman after Ironman Florida, really doing it more so for the love of the sport. And in 2000, I think it was 14, Ironman came up with this idea called legacy athlete. And a legacy athlete pretty much means you're stupid enough to do 12 Ironman races. And if you finish all 12, you qualify for the World Championship in Hawaii, which is the holy grail of all triathlon.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept on and kept on with the sport, made countless friends all across the country doing the sport, but I also made countless friends who were former heart patients.
Mm-hmm.
Overcoming their own obstacles. I have a lady who's my, I guess you would call her my training partner. We mostly run together. She has a picture of herself sitting on her mother's lap when she was 6 years old, and she's got a scar this long in her chest where they had open heart surgery on her when she was 6 years old. It's just phenomenal what some people have gone through. But I kept on and kept on, and finally got my 12th Ironman. And then Ironman makes you do a validation race after that, which don't get me started on that. I don't know why you have to validate anything if you've already done 12. So I had to do 13. And then I got an email, I'll never forget that, saying that I was invited to compete in the 2018 World Championship. So went to Kona, and you're competing with people who are literally the best athletes in the world at the sport. And I was so far out of my league. I mean, way out of my league. And somebody told me, they said, well, you went out on top. And I said, no, I went out on the bottom of the top. I mean, these people are crazy, crazy fit. But,
yeah, but those crazy, crazy fit didn't go through what you went through. So you can't compare.
True. That's true. But okay, that's a good point. But I have a saying. There's not a person among us that does not have a gift or talent that the rest of us would not be in awe of. Nor is there a person among us that has not gone through or will go through a difficulty the rest of us can't fathom. So everybody standing at that starting line, like I told the athletes at Ironman Texas after they showed my video at the athlete dinner, I told them, I said, my story is my story. My story isn't any better than any of yours. Everybody's gone through something.
Or will go through something.
Exactly. And I'm a big believer. I know you've done some endurance races and so forth. And I'm a big believer that when people cross the finish line and you see them crying, they are not crying because they finished the race. They are crying because they overcame what it was they had to fight through, the demons you have to fight through.
The demons, yes.
To get to the finish line. That to me is why is the true, real, raw reason. Because when you do these crazy, crazy long endurance races, you get stripped completely raw
Mhm.
to the
There's
core.
pain, there's suffering.
There's I can't tell you how many times I've said this is just stupid. You know, because if you quit, you know, it would be so easy to quit.
Mhm.
It would be so easy.
You know, when
But-
I've done something, you know, long distance, one of the things that always kind of like stayed in the back of my head is when Winston Churchill, it's a quote, when you're going
Mhm.
through hell, keep going. And that's what
Yes.
I have to like tell myself in those moments where I'm like, I got many more miles to go. It's hot. I'm in pain. I got blisters. I'm going through hell, but I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, and I also I came up with something during one of my races where I thought it suddenly dawned on me. You never have a pain that doesn't end.
Mm.
And so I told myself during this one race, because I was in really bad shape in one race, and I told myself, okay, you have this pain right now. You need to just compartmentalize it because it's going to end. So do you want to make it end by just quitting? Or do you want to make it end by getting to the finish line and then
Mm-hmm.
dealing with it?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of you have to it's I tell people when I speak to running clubs or triathlon clubs or whatever, I tell them the hardest distance that you will ever conquer in any race is the distance between your ears.
That's so good. Yes.
That is if you can conquer that one, you can usually make it through most stuff.
Yeah, I think people think it's more physical than mental, but I would argue it is more mental than physical.
Yeah, once you get to a certain point, it is. Now I know there was a Navy SEAL. The story was shared with me, who told a group of athletes. You always hear people talking about in a marathon they hit the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that I guess there have been medical studies done on this where when you hit that point, you've only used up 40% of your
Oh, that's
reserve.
David Goggins.
Yep, that's it.
David
Yep.
Goggins. Mm-hmm. You
Yeah.
always have an extra 40% when you think you have reached your limit.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I've had races where I won't get too graphic about it, but I've walked off the side of the course because I thought I was going to get sick,
Mhm.
and just yelled out loud, you know, this is just stupid. This is crazy. I can't believe I'm doing it. And then I was fine.
You have to have a moment sometimes. It's
Yeah.
a moment.
Yeah. So anyway, so I went on and you know, did the Ironman World Championship, which was just a great blessing. And that was my swan song for Ironman. I decided to walk away from it after that. And you know, now I'm doing ultramarathons now. I've done 800 milers, and
wow.
would like to eventually get to I have one more race on my list I'd like to be able to do someday, and that's the Western States 100, because it's basically the Boston Marathon and the Kona of ultramarathon running.
Oh, okay.
Now, the likelihood of me qualifying for it outright is really not real high.
Just tell them you've done 14 Ironman. That should
Yeah,
qualify
but
you.
that's a whole other beast. But anyway, so I'm constantly in awe of people and what they have overcome, and I do my best to draw strength from those types of people. You know, someone asked me one time why I do all this.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you that too.
Okay.
Why go to the extreme?
Okay. And my answer, I think, is a little weird. I'm not trying to find out what I can do. I'm trying to find out what I can't do.
Mm-hmm. And how does that make you feel? Like, what is the feelings you're getting from all of this? What does it give you?
Well, I grew up in an environment where I was told pretty much every day of my life, you can't, you can't, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a personal saying, redefine can't. I had to learn to redefine what is my can't? What is it that I can't do?
Mm.
And because of that, I tend to push myself more towards things that are challenging. I don't know how else to put it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can, one thing I learned early on is you can either allow your fears to keep you at bay,
Mm-hmm.
or you can just run headlong at them.
Mm-hmm.
And I do my best to run headlong at them, because I will tell you, they're all the races I've done, all the things I've done, I'm never standing on the starting line of a race feeling like, oh, I've got this. You know, you train, you do your best, but it's the things that happen to you that you never expected, like blisters on your feet. You know, that you have to figure out a way to overcome them to get to the finish line.
And also just overcome the mental part of it, because I can imagine when you have these major heart events and you might, I don't know if you have an idea, like, is this my last race, or I'm not going to even like give it any attention. Like, what is your like thoughts on that?
About if it's my last race, or
Yeah, giving your heart events and all that type of stuff, knowing that, or is your heart like fully recovered? Like, what has your doctor said?
Oh, I'm my resting heart rate, I have some days where it's actually in the high 30s.
Wow.
It's
That's like Lance Armstrong numbers here.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, normally I would say my resting heart rate over an average of 7 days is like 45, something of that nature. I just don't let it paralyze me.
Ah, very good.
And it would be so easy to do. You can, you know, you can talk yourself in and out of a lot of things.
Yeah, so it's really all of these examples and everything that you've gone through have and you've been an inspiration to others. And I know you do motivational speaking. Can you share a little bit about some of the, maybe some of the tidbits that you give in some of those motivational speeches?
So normally a client will contact me and they'll say, and I've spoken to every kind of group imaginable, but they'll say, here's the theme of our meeting, or here's what our group is about. Can you build a speech around it? This is what I've learned. The greatest motivational story there is, period, is your own.
The most relatable.
And people can say all they want that, you know, yes, I am inspired by other people. And yes, I love to hear great inspirational stories of what people have overcome, because I'm always curious to know how they did it. But when you really boil it all down, it's really what has happened to you and your own life experiences that are your motivator. I don't know if that's a great answer, but it's how I view it. So what I try to share with audiences is, like I've given things on team building and that kind of stuff to corporations. And what I tell people is, you know, if the people you work with are not productive, what do you know about them? What do you know about drives them to come to work every day? Do you really know any of that? Because when you find out, when you start to learn about people and you start to learn why they do what they do, and you're able to empathize, or whatever the word would be compassionate, so forth, whatever their story is, you just lift that person up to such a high level. And that, again, because it's their own story that motivates them the most. So that's really what I come across with. I have a story. My number one most requested speech is called the Ivy story. And if we have a few more minutes,
oh yes, go ahead.
I'll share the Ivy story. So Ivy was a young boy who grew up in North Carolina. Ivy grew up in a family that was far from wealthy. And Ivy was basically a kid who he was super skinny. He was unathletic. He had basically a rare condition with his teeth where his two front teeth grew almost straight out of his mouth. Mm. And he would spend his days, he never smiled, and he would spend his days pulling his lip down, trying to cover up where his teeth were sticking out. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a God thing, one day he was out with his mother, and someone from the University of North Carolina School of Orthodontics saw him because his family couldn't afford braces, and saw him and said, "Hey, we'll take him on as a test case and we'll do it gratis." So when Ivy was young, his father was in good physical condition and got him into running. Mm-hmm. But his father was also not a good person. Mm-hmm. His father physically and verbally abused him horrifically. And his father, when Ivy would run, would turn around and run backwards and mock him for how slow he was. Mm. So Ivy set his first goal ever as a runner, and that was to make his father have to turn around and run forward. And then he set his second goal as a runner to run past his father and never have to run beside him again. Mm. So running was extremely important in Ivy's life. And he ran cross country in junior high school in 7th and 8th grade. And 2 years in a row, he finished last in every single cross country meet that he ran in. Mm-hmm. But he kept it up because running was an escape for him mm-hmm. from the physical and abuse at home.
The trauma.
And there was even an episode where he was in the stall in the boys' bathroom getting dressed for a track meet, and he would always get dressed in the stall rather than getting dressed out where the other boys were, because he would have welts on his body, and he didn't want the other boys to see. Mm. He was embarrassed about it. But his track coach walked in on him one day and saw him and looked at him and basically said, "I'll take care of the situation if you want me to." Mm. And it was really one of the first times that anybody knew what was happening to him. So, as I said, running was a very important part of Ivy's life. And when he was about 15, his father one day, unprovoked rage, took a golf club iron and swung it at him and knocked his left knee out. Tore all the ligaments, tore all the tendons, and didn't take him to the doctor. Mm-hmm. And Ivy didn't realize that it was because, you know, they probably had to call CPS or whatever. So it took Ivy approximately 2 to 3 years before he could actually walk again, even normally walk.
Oh my God.
And it was another year or two before he could actually run again. Mm. So he lost a long period of his life, and he had to drastically favor his right leg when he walked because his left leg wouldn't support him. Mm-hmm. And even as he grew older, it was very difficult for him to stand straight up mm-hmm. Because of the pressure on his left leg. So he developed a little bit of a hunch in his stature. But when he was 24, he decided he wanted to try to run a marathon. And he got to mile 21 of the marathon and started getting leg cramps and basically sat down, fell over on the curb on the side of the road. And what he did not know at the time was he could have gotten up and kept going. Mm-hmm. But he didn't, because he didn't have the courage and the faith in himself to get up and keep going. Mm-hmm. He was living out what his father had told him, that he was worthless, that he would never be good at anything. And so failure to him was what was expected of him. So he kept on running, kept on trying. And eventually the next year he did finish his first marathon.
That's good.
Yeah. And he kept on. He never stopped trying. He never stopped trying to figure out what it was that he can't do. And he went on to complete a total of 25 marathons. That included 3 Boston marathons. Then he got involved in the sport of Ironman. And he completed 14 Ironman races, including the World Championship. He completed 8 100-mile ultramarathons. My full name is Robert L. Key IV.
Oh my gosh, I was getting chills. I just realized. Yes. Thank you for
Fourth is the
sharing
Roman
that.
numeral IV. I'm IV.
Mhm. Yes, I just realized. Thank you for sharing that. I know that that's like maybe hard to talk about, hard to share, but I know you do with certain groups like domestic violence and so on. And man, that is just a remarkable story. I know that people can let the past paralyze them. They can let those, and when we have the past, we think of memories and we think of thoughts, and that's what you had at that 21-mile mark. And sometimes you have to like remove the past because it doesn't exist anymore. It's just our thoughts. What we're having is just that present moment, and that's the power in that present moment, not the past, not the future. And you really, I think if anybody understands that better.
Well, and I will tell you, it would be very easy to be the most bitter, hateful person in the world.
Yeah, because your dad is supposed to protect you.
Yeah. And I choose not to be. And I spent 8 years, I volunteered coaching kids to do the Houston Texans triathlon. It's ages 6 to 15. It was the largest kids triathlon in the world. And I will tell you, I loved every single kid I worked with. I never wanted to coach any kids that were elite. I wanted to coach the ones who had never accomplished anything athletically, who were the square peg in the round hole. And all of them are the ones that my heart went out to, because I saw a little bit of me in them. You know, the struggling with self-esteem, the struggle with, you know, watching all the other kids who do all these amazing things and you know, and they're not. And it just gave me, it gives me more joy to see someone else complete a race than any joy I ever got of completing one on my own, ever.
Yeah, the event that I met you at, one of the things that you said was that you've never done anything great until you've helped somebody else do something great. And it stuck with me. I like that quote. That was really good. And it's so true, because I mean, what is the meaning and purpose of this life? It is other people and having those interactions. It's not all this other shallow stuff that, you know, people.
Yeah, I mean, something else I said along those lines was, there's nothing like finishing your first race at any distance, but after that, there's nothing that even compares to helping somebody else get across the finish line. I've been very fortunate the last 6 years. I'm one of the last official, I'm the last official starter and finisher of the Houston Marathon. Myself and my training partner, we're I guess you could say we're part of the marathon committee. So
wait a minute, you start at the front line and then what do you mean by
we start when all the crowd is gone? That's when we cross the starting line. So we're crossing the starting line almost an hour after the gun goes off.
Gotcha. Okay.
And once we cross that starting line, the marathon committee gives us exactly 6 hours to finish, which is the cutoff time for all the runners. But what we represent, we wear balloons and everything and have a lot of fun with it. But what we represent is the cutoff. So if you're not ahead of us at certain points on the course,
gotcha, then,
you know, you're not going to make it. But the rewarding thing about that is when you get to around mile 20 to 23, which is, you know, again, the wall.
Yes.
We are helping easily 100 to 200 people to keep going. And she and I are experienced endurance athletes, and we'll run back and tell people, come on, come on, come on. And when we get to that finish line, the marathon committee wants us to finish in exactly 6 hours from when we started. And we use literally every second. I mean, this year, when I crossed the finish line at the end, I was if you look at my results, I was the last person in every single category.
Yes, this is the Houston Marathon, if anybody's wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, the Houston Marathon. But nothing to me is more rewarding than all of these people we're helping. And these people start to get so emotional, and they'll tell you their story and why they're there. And
yeah, it's like you get to experience it all over again through their eyes too. It's like, it's like your first drug hit. If, not to make that analogy, but like that high is never as good as like the second or third or whatever.
Yeah. And that spot where I collapsed at mile 21 back in 1984, that spot, every year when I go by it, I run over to it and just tap it. And each year, inevitably, I'm with one or two of these runners who are doing their best to try to finish. Most of the time, it's their first one. And I will tell them the story of what happened to me at that spot. And I will say, that's not going to be you today. Because you see the courage in these people.
Yes, yes. That's so cool that, you're not just running for yourself. You have found other avenues on how you can give back, and also, help people, with their own goals and succeeding with those. So I think that's cool that you do that at the very end, run the end of the race and help people. Yeah,
it's very rewarding.
So what's your future now going forward? You're 62, is that right?
62.
Yeah, 62. So you're on the 6th floor. Do you plan on running while you get to the 7th floor, the 8th floor? Like, what is your goals and how do you perceive this going forward?
Really right now, for the first time in my life, I don't really have any specific goals. As far I've been really blessed to do everything I've done. Very blessed. And for me, I would say, if anything, my biggest goal is to help other people see that themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I have some other things I'm toying with in the back of my mind, but and they're stupid. But
but your focus is to take what you have learned and gone through, your experience, your wisdom, and now that you're older, obviously that makes sense that you have more like a mentor, role model, give back, because you've already kind of been there, done that, and now it's time to help others.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing I can give to these people is to let them know I have been exactly where you are. I've had the same struggles, the same mental struggles. And I'm talking about these races. I've had the same mental struggles to have to overcome. I've had the same physical. I know what you're going through. I completely understand it, and you can do it.
And you, not only that, you've gone through some major traumas in life that, I think for a lot of runners, that is a coping mechanism, a coping strategy with dealing with trauma, because it takes you out of that. Because I mean, when you're having to go through some suffering and some pain, you have to be present in that moment, and you can't be in the past, and you can't like dwell in those things. But that's another area where you do see amongst the elite. I wouldn't say the elite are necessarily unscathed. A lot of them have dealt with a lot of crazy stuff.
Everyone is driven by something.
Yeah. What's your why?
What's my why?
Yeah.
My why is to help you be the best you can be.
It's a good one.
And actually, that's interesting. I was the guest speaker at the American Heart Association Heart Walk, their annual fundraiser several years ago, and they had a campaign called Why, and you were supposed to give it to them, and they would put it on your T-shirt, and I just put down you.
Not I, not me.
No.
You. I like that.
You.
Yeah. That's it. I think, like, why do we do anything in life? Like you have to really question, why are you doing this? And like you said, some of these races, these are like, they're crazy long. They're ultras. This is extreme. And if you don't start off knowing why you're doing it from the start,
Right.
it's going to be difficult for you to end, because you're going to need to have that why answered and already ready to go and to, you know, refer to while you're in the race so that you can stay the course.
So when I speak to running groups, I always tell them, I wish, especially if it's your first race at a particular distance, I will always tell people, I wish that they had a spot on the application form. Why are you doing this? What's the real raw reason you're doing this? Because what happens is those people enter these races and they really don't know what they're getting themselves into. It can be anything. You know, I've had people who tell me, well, I've only run a 5K and that's insignificant compared to what you've done. Not at all. It's all relative. If someone has accomplished a 5K and that was a goal they set for themselves, that is absolutely no better than anything I've done ever. So I tell these people, I wish that you could write down your why, because what happens is once you sign up for the race, you start to lose sight of the why. You start learning about pacing and time and all these other things, and you get caught up in the superficial aspects of it.
Yeah. Because if you don't answer that, then you might quit. Yeah. You might stop.
Yet when you get in those last few miles and you're stripped down, you remember your why.
Yep. That's what's going to power you through the pain, the suffering, take you to the other side where you can feel proud of your accomplishments. But I think that the why becomes more than just about yourself. Maybe the why is initially, I'm going to run to lose weight, or I'm going to, you know, whatever, like something like that. But then you realize it's bigger than that in a lot of ways. And your why will evolve. The more that you challenge, the more you keep doing these types of things, and checking in with your why and why we do anything, in particular, things like this. Your why will, I think, become a bigger, more meaningful, more impactful, more purposeful. At least it should.
Yeah. And just going back to my heart again.
Yeah.
I choose to look at that as another reason or another example that I can share with people about a difficult time and a fear I went through. And I got through it. I got through it. And, you know, this morning I was out on a run and again, I'm looking at my watch and I'm waiting on that heart rate to come down.
Yeah. One of my previous people that I've interviewed on this channel, she had talked about, like, once you've had that event, you're already healed because you've already had the event. Like after they burned you, now you're in healing mode. I mean, you have moved on. That's the mindset you need to move forward with, like that healing mode.
Yeah.
The worst is behind you.
Yeah. And I'm looking at my backdrop here. I think that people feel like when they cross a finish line, that's going to be the end all be all, that it's going to make them whole. I will never forget the first time I ran the Boston Marathon. I was sure that when I crossed that finish line, it was going to be the greatest moment of my life, and I would never need to do it again.
Pinnacle. Yeah.
And I remember I crossed the finish line. The very first thing was, I got to get back here and do it again. That was the very first thought. So, you know, is it life-changing? Yes, it is, because you've shown yourself you can do something. But you're more defined about what's outside the start line and the finish line.
And also the journey in between there. Yeah, no doubt. So yeah, don't focus on it. You could have an anticlimactic feeling in a moment. You're like, that was it, or what's that? Go back to your why, go back to the whole process of it, you know, not just crossing a line, because it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
So we're getting here to the end. Is there any final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience?
No, I hope I've touched somebody and given somebody some hope. As I said, my story is not any better than anybody else's. It's just my story. it may sound cliche to say be proud of who you are.
Mhm.
It took me a long time to feel
Mhm.
that way.
Mhm.
And make sure that whatever you're doing, make sure you're doing something that also is helping somebody else,
Mhm.
not just
Yes.
yourself.
We need more of that in today's world.
Amen.
So you're a motivational speaker, which I mentioned at the beginning. How can people get a hold of you?
They can email me at robert@redefinecant.com. That's really the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Okay. And I'll put your email, if you're okay with that, in the description
Absolutely.
box. And then people can email you if they need to get you to come for a speaking event or what have you.
Oh, I'd love it. So
Awesome. Well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate you sharing your story, and not only the hard events, nearly dying, but also going and overcoming, a very traumatic childhood and, coming out on the other side and seeing the bigger picture, which is helping other people. So
yes.
you are an inspiration, and you've touched me. So you can already count that one. That's checked. So thank you for coming on my channel today.
Well, I'm thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure to have met you.
Yes, yes. So if you guys like this video, be sure and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to leave a comment down below, maybe even a question for Robert. He might check it out. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be alerted to when the next video drops. Thanks for watching.